I can just say to you that this I call it the homeschool prison cycle has been very detrimental for many families, and all it has done is really set our children up for a slave system, and it is the new Jim Crow. In my own communities, I began to see a lot of the young people that were on the streets. This was like mid 80s. Began to see a lot of kids on the streets. Couldn't figure out why there were so many kids that were on the streets that should have been in school at that time. So me being the person that I am, I asked. I started asking them, so why aren't you in school? Or what's your name and why aren't you in school? And they would say, I'm suspended or I'm expelled. And so I would ask the question, well, why are you expelled? So many times they couldn't tell me why they were suspended from school. It was amazing to me that 90.9% of the time, the parents didn't know why they were out of school. Many times there wouldn't be a suspension notice. And so what I found was that they were just out for all of these frivolous infractions. Things like disrespect to the teacher. That could have been something as simple as the teacher said, move your feet out the aisle. And they said, oh man, when a child comes into a classroom and then you begin to see the difference in how you're treated versus your white counterpart. What do you think happens? If he's raising his hand, which is what happens with my son a lot, if he does raise his hand and he's ignored, what happens? They become the invisible child in the classroom. So basically what that meant was that if there was any kind of dysfunction in the home, then you can rest assured that child was going to end up in a detention center. One of the things that really got me was that a lot of these kids, within the first 21 days of school, they were expelled. After the first 21 days of schools, they were expelled. And what I found out then was that it took 21 days for them to actually, for that Title I money, they had to be in school at least 21 days for them to get it. So after the 21 days, you started seeing them suspend these kids long term, 10 days at a time, 5 days at a time, until they were actually just push. I call it the push out. He wasn't doing well at all academically, and I remember this kid how he became labeled. Anything that happened, didn't matter whether he was around or whatever, they found this kid. And I remember the emotional and the psychological damage that this kid suffered. And the reason I say that is I remember one day I was at his home, and he was in his kitchen. He wasn't directly in the kitchen. He was kind of standing at the door. And in the cabinet were dishes that hadn't been put in very well. Probably the kids washing dishes. Kids don't sit them in nice and neatly. They just put them in the cabinet, And so as he was standing in the door, the dishes just fell out the cabinet, I'm sorry. And when it did, he just went all to pieces. Oh, Mommy, I didn't do it. He just went off like that. So she couldn't understand what. No, she was saying it's okay. What in the world is wrong with you? But then what we understood was that every time, everything that happened in the school, if he was around anybody, or even if he wasn't, he was involved. I mean, he became involved, whether he was in it or whether he wasn't in it. What a cruel thing for somebody to do to a child, and that's when I began to see the psychological and the emotional damage that low-income children, particularly African-American males, were facing in the school system. He was in the 6th grade, had been held back 2 or 3 times, but he was still allowed to play football. And my fight was with the coaches, because in their minds, because we lived in I was in a low income housing, and the school was right behind my housing, where I lived, and because we lived there was no expectation for my son whatsoever. So the only thing that they wanted him to do was run back, because he was good at playing ball. So it was like he didn't really care about his grades. I was so upset at the fact that they kept wanting him to play football. And when I would try to intervene, then they would say in front of my son, they would say to my son, to me, "Why do you not want him to play football, Mom? If he doesn't play football, he's not going to do anything but sell drugs." It was his dream that he was going to break the vicious cycles, and that's why I always use that word, breaking vicious cycles. He was going to break the vicious cycles in his family, because he was going to be the first one to go to college, right? And he just knew he was going because his coaches had promised him, "We're going to get you a football scholarship, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that." He was the water boy. He was the whatever. He was the young man who came to move coach's furniture if the coach's furniture was too heavy in the house. Or anything that he could do for that coach, that's what he did, because that's how much he loved him. You know, this man was like a father figure to him, because in the absence of a father, you know, he was like a father figure to him. The very last game, a young man called him the N-word on the field, right? And he retaliated, causing them to have I'm not a football person, so I don't know, what was it? Anyway, he was penalized, and it caused them to lose the game. When that happened, the coach stopped speaking to him. He said when he came down the hall that the coach would turn his head. He would not have a meeting with him. He wouldn't. I think the most hurtful thing is that, and another coach told me this. He said, Ms. Blackson, he said, "It hurts me so bad." He said that every time a letter from a college came for my son, this man threw it in the trash. He threw it in the trash can. I don't think that change can come until people start to look at themselves. One thing I would, I think it's part of a larger system of oppression to maintain a system of slavery. I think that that there's always been this addiction to free labor. You know, there's always been this addiction to free labor, and so I really think that that it's a part of that. I mean, you look in the news, you got judges selling youth to detention centers. You got prisons, the prison industrial complex or the prison corporations suing states because their beds are not full. Come on, I mean, can you sit here and say to me that it's a conspiracy theory? Can you sit here and say to me that, Geraldine, that's just your mess? You can't. You can't.